"You never stay anywhere long," my mother said, and 31 people in the church fellowship hall heard her clearly over the clink of serving spoons and paper plates. 3 days before I was supposed to start my first salon chair rental, my parents had forged my name on a lease termination form, filed it with my apartment complex, and then told my landlord, my church, and anyone useful that I had abandoned my place and was spiraling. If that paperwork had stood, I would have lost my housing, my rental reference, and the salon chair I had already paid $1,200 to secure. Then one Tuesday morning, a woman in a navy blazer opened a file in front of my family and said 7 words that changed everything. This document should never have been accepted. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Lauren Michelle Carter. I'm 23 years old. Now let me take you back to Tulsa, Oklahoma in March of 2022. I had been waiting for that spring for years, not in a dreamy, abstract way, but in the kind of practical, exhausted way women wait for the first stretch of road after a very long traffic jam. I had finished cosmetology school in December, passed my state board exam on March 17th, and signed for a chair rental at a small salon called Willow and Pine on South Peoria 2 days later. It was not glamorous. The salon smelled like hairspray, coffee, and expensive shampoo, and the owner, Denise Holloway, was the sort of woman who wore soft gray cardigans and knew exactly how much toner was left in every bottle. But it was mine, or as close to mine as anything had ever been. I had saved $1,200 for the chair deposit, another $460 for color inventory, and I had spent the whole winter sleeping under a blanket that shed fuzz all over my black leggings because every spare dollar had a job. My parents did not like the word independent. They liked successful when it reflected on them, obedient when it benefited them, and available whenever my younger brother Connor needed something signed, fetched, covered, excused, or explained. They were not cartoonishly cruel people in public. My mother, Diane Carter, taught women's Bible study twice a month and had a bright, practiced smile she could put on like lipstick. My father, Randall Carter, worked for a commercial roofing company and had the heavy, settled confidence of a man people called dependable because he rarely raised his voice in front of witnesses. The problem with people like that is not that they are dramatic, it is that they are believable. I had moved into my one-bedroom apartment in Broken Arrow the previous August. It was 37 minutes from my parents' house in Jenks, which was close enough to be practical and far enough to breathe. The apartment was small, beige, and permanently scented with somebody else's cooking in the hallway, but it had a narrow balcony where I kept 2 pots of herbs I was trying not to kill. I paid $795 a month, and every time I slid my key into that lock, I felt a tiny private satisfaction. That is how low the bar had been. A door I could close by myself felt like progress. The quiet, steady person in that season was my friend Megan Alvarez. She worked mornings at a coffee shop near the salon and never once told me what I should do. She just appeared when needed, usually with an extra cold brew and a look that said she had already made room in her day. The first time I brought home my state board pass letter, she stood in my kitchen, tapped the paper with one fingernail, and said, "Frame it before somebody tries to explain it away." I laughed then because I thought she was being dramatic. She was not. There was also Mrs. Loretta Baines, who was 71 and sat 3 rows behind my family at church every Sunday in a lavender cardigan, no matter the weather. She had known my mother since high school, had silver hair set in careful soft curls, and carried hard candy in her purse like a woman who had outlived the need to ask permission. She was present for more than people realize because older women become furniture to the careless. They stop lowering their voices around them. Mrs. Loretta had a way of folding her church bulletin into precise squares while she watched everything. The first sign that something was wrong came on Monday, March 21st, at 9:14 in the morning. I was in the parking lot outside a beauty supply store on East 31st Street, making a list in my notes app of what I still needed before my first day at the salon. Foils, neck strips, tint brushes, a ring light if I could manage it next month. My phone rang and the screen showed Ashford Oaks leasing office. I answered cheerfully because I thought maybe they were calling about the package lockers being down again. Instead, a woman named Tasha asked, in a very careful voice, if I planned to return my keys by 5 since my early termination had been processed. For a second, I thought she had called the wrong tenant. I remember the warmth inside the car, the smell of dust from the vents, the sharp little clicking sound of my turn signal still blinking though I wasn't turning. I told her there had to be some mistake because I had not terminated anything. She went quiet in the way people do when they are suddenly aware they are standing on a trap door. Then she said they had my signed notice, filed in person on Friday, witnessed by one of their leasing staff. Friday was the day I had been at my state board practical from 8:30 in the morning until nearly 3, with my phone locked away in a plastic bin. That is how long it took them to try to erase me. One business day. I drove straight to the leasing office with my state board wristband still tucked in my purse and my exam completion sheet folded in the side pocket. Tasha met me in the lobby with the kind of expression receptionists wear when they know they are in the middle of something ugly but did not create it. She printed the termination form and laid it flat on her desk. My name was on it in a clumsy imitation of my signature. The date was March 18th. The reason line said voluntary move out. There was a witness signature from a leasing associate named Caleb Morris. I knew instantly it was false, not just because I had not signed it, but because my real signature curves upward at the end and that one dropped hard downward, like somebody trying too carefully. Tasha told me whoever had brought it in also confirmed my forwarding address verbally and said I would be staying with family for a while. Family? That word did something physical inside me. It made my hands cold. I asked to see the office intake log and she hesitated, then slid the paper toward herself and said her manager would need to approve that. She gave me a photocopy of the termination and told me not to surrender my keys. I called my mother from the parking lot because some daughters are still daughters, even while standing over fresh damage. She answered on the second ring and sounded almost pleased. When I asked if she knew anything about my lease being terminated, she exhaled and said, "Lauren, we did what needed to be done. You were getting in over your head. You can't even keep your room clean for more than a week." I was sitting in my car in a strip mall parking lot, staring at a forged version of my own name, and she was talking to me like I was 12 with wet towels on the floor. When I asked if she had actually filed paperwork pretending to be me, she said, "You should thank us before that salon embarrasses you." Then she hung up. I drove to my parents' house because shock still sometimes wears the clothes of hope. My father was in the garage polishing a socket set on an old rag, as if this were a normal Monday and not the day his daughter discovered she had been administratively removed from her own life. Connor was there too, leaning against the freezer in a faded college hoodie, scrolling his phone. He was 21 then, my mother's favorite emergency, forever in need of rescue, and somehow always the one being protected from consequences. When I held up the photocopy and asked who had signed as me, my father did not deny it. He just said that apartment was a mistake. You were wasting money to play grown-up. Connor looked away so quickly I knew he had known. My mother came in from the kitchen, dried her hands on a dish towel, and started immediately with the language she used whenever she wanted to cover something brutal with moral varnish. She said they had been worried. She said I had seemed restless. She said I was not ready to manage bills, a job, and a lease at the same time. She said they had spared me a public failure. When I said forging legal housing documents was not concern but fraud, she gave me a look I had known all my life, the one that said I was making the room unpleasant by naming what was in it. Then she said, "If you keep using ugly words, people will stop listening to you." People had already stopped listening to me. That part came next. By Tuesday afternoon, Denise from Willow and Pine called and asked if my address had changed. A woman had phoned the salon and said there was confusion about whether I was between places and whether I should be handling client information. The implication was so naked it almost impressed me. If they could not stop me from starting, they would make me look unstable enough that a cautious business owner would back away on her own. Denise did not accuse me, but I could hear the caution settling into her voice. She asked if everything was all right and whether she should hold off on announcing my start date. It was one of the worst kinds of humiliation because nothing explicit had been said, and yet the damage had already arrived. That evening I sat at my kitchen counter, under the yellow light from the overhead fixture, and started doing what women do when nobody is coming to save them. I made a timeline. 9:14 a.m. leasing office call, 9:48 a.m. in office with Tasha, 10:23 a.m. phone call to mother, 11:15 a.m. confrontation at parents' house, 2:06 p.m. Denise's call. I took screenshots of every text message. I photographed the lease termination form beside my actual driver's license signature and my lease paperwork from August. I found my state board exam confirmation email and the check-in time and printed it. Then I opened a fresh notebook, wrote March 21st across the top, and began documenting every contact. My parents escalated on Wednesday. My mother called my Aunt Cheryl, and my Aunt Cheryl called me with that damp little voice relatives use when they want access to the drama without owning any of the harm. She asked if I might have signed something in frustration and forgotten. She said stress can do odd things to a young mind. My mother had not just forged paperwork, she was laying the groundwork to suggest I was unreliable in memory and mood. By Thursday, 2 women from church had messaged to say they were praying for me during this unstable season. I had not announced any unstable season. My parents had done that for me. I went to the Broken Arrow Police Department on Friday morning at 10:10 and filed a report for forgery and fraudulent lease termination. I expected to feel theatrical or vindictive and felt neither. I felt tired, clear, and 20 years older than I had the week before. The officer at the desk was matter of fact and asked for my documents, the timeline, and the names of anyone with access to my personal information and signature samples. I gave him my parents' names without shaking. That felt like crossing a border inside myself. Once I had the police report number, something in me settled, not softened, settled. I stopped arguing with my parents about whether what they had done was wrong, because the argument itself was part of the trap. If I stayed in the realm of feelings, they would outtalk me and outparent me and suggest to every bystander that this was just a family misunderstanding. Paper does not care about tone. Records do not care who hosted Thanksgiving. So I moved my whole life into documentation. I emailed Ashford Oaks formally, attaching a copy of the police report, my state board attendance confirmation, and a written dispute of the lease termination. I requested the intake log, camera footage from the office lobby on March 18th, and employment verification for Caleb Morris, whose name was on the witness line. The property manager, a woman named Sandra Pike, responded by saying footage could only be released through corporate or law enforcement, but she would note my dispute in the file. She also said my account had already been marked as early move-out pending key return, meaning if I had panicked and just turned in my keys, they would have completed the lie for me. Denise at Willow and Pine called me in for coffee that Saturday before opening. The salon at 8 in the morning smelled like bleach, citrus cleaner, and those expensive candles nobody lights once clients arrive. She sat across from me with a legal pad and asked me directly if there was anything she needed to worry about. I told her the truth. Not all my childhood history, just the truth that mattered. My parents had submitted fraudulent housing paperwork, someone had called her salon to undermine me, and I had a police report and a dispute pending. Denise listened, tapped her pen twice, and said, "I don't hire people based on family gossip. Bring me documents if they contact me again." It was one of the kindest things anyone said to me that month. Megan started coming by my apartment every evening around 6:30 with either coffee or soup. She never asked if I was sure about going to the police. She never gave me the big speech about blood being thicker than water, because women who have watched another woman be mistreated do not always need a philosophy. Sometimes they just need to make sure she eats. One night she stood at my sink washing 2 bowls and said, "I know you think this is about the apartment, but it's really about the fact that you were almost gone." I dried a spoon and did not answer because she was right. The lease was the instrument. The real target was the fact that I had built a door that did not open through them. On Sunday came the church scene that still lives in my body. It was after service in the fellowship hall, the room with beige folding chairs, humming fluorescent lights, and a long buffet table of casseroles slowly cooling under aluminum foil. Mrs. Loretta Baines was there in lavender, as always, stirring too much sweet and low into weak coffee. My mother was near the center table with 3 women from Bible study and 2 deacons' wives. I had only stopped by because Mrs. Loretta had texted me, in her careful one-finger way, to say she wanted to give me a deviled egg tray back. I should have taken the tray and left. Instead, I heard my own life being rearranged in real time. "You never stay anywhere long," my mother said. We tried to help her quietly, but she has made all of this into a spectacle. My father nodded beside her like a man approving weather. One woman made the low, sympathetic sound people make when they think they are hearing about a personal crisis rather than an engineered one. Then my mother added, "She left that apartment in such disarray the office had to process things quickly." It was surgical. She was not just justifying the forgery, she was planting the idea that I was dirty, unstable, irresponsible, and difficult to manage. 4 adjectives, and a young woman can lose work. Mrs. Loretta turned then and looked straight at my mother over the rim of her paper cup. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, "Diane, some things should not be said with potato salad on the table." A few people shifted. My mother gave a small laugh and said she was only asking for prayer. I took the deviled egg tray from the counter, told Mrs. Loretta thank you, and walked out before I said anything I could not. Later footnote. That night, Mrs. Loretta called me from her landline. I could hear the little static hush older phones make. She said I was there. I heard every word. If anyone needs me to say so, I will. Then she added in that dry voice of hers, "Your mother has mistaken confidence for truth for a very long time." It was not a dramatic speech, it was better, it was a witness. By the following Tuesday, Ashford Oaks Corporate had assigned a regional compliance manager to review my dispute because there were irregularities in the file. That phrase changed my breathing. Irregularities, not family issues, not a misunderstanding, an internal failure with traceable points. Her name was Evelyn Mercer. She was 64, with silver bobbed hair, rimless glasses, and the kind of even voice that made everyone around her start speaking more carefully. The first time we spoke by phone, she asked precise questions and let silence sit until the answer was finished. Had I ever authorized anyone to submit documents on my behalf? No. Had I been physically present on March 18th between 11:40 and noon? No. Did I know Caleb Morris personally? No. Could I send specimens of my actual signature from prior lease documents? Yes. My parents did not know any of this yet, so they escalated again on March 30th. My father called the salon and asked to speak to Denise. He told her he was concerned I was making false accusations because I had a pattern of emotional overreaction. He said he feared I might lash out at a workplace if corrected. Denise did not tell me until after she hung up on him. She simply texted, "Your father called. Bring your documents tomorrow." I printed everything and met her before my training shift. She added my police report number and the notes from his call to a folder in her office and said if anyone else contacted her, she would direct them to her attorney. I had known her for 11 days. She protected me more cleanly than my own parents ever had. Connor finally entered the story properly on April 1st. He showed up at my apartment at 7:20 in the evening carrying a plastic grocery bag with 2 containers of gas station tea and a look I had last seen on him in high school after he backed Dad's truck into a mailbox. He stood at my door, not coming in until I stepped aside. Then he told me he had driven with our mother to Ashford Oaks on March 18th because she didn't want to park alone. He said he sat in the car, but he saw her walk in with a manila folder. He also said Dad later told him the witness line had been handled through someone they knew from church whose nephew worked maintenance for the complex. He kept saying he had not known the full plan, as if ignorance has levels that matter once the building is on fire. Connor was the secondary villain in all this because he had known enough to stop something and chose the easier loyalty. He had accepted my mother's version that they were helping me before I embarrassed myself. But when he sat on the edge of my couch and looked around my apartment, I saw him taking in, maybe for the first time, the folded throw blanket, the appointment calendar on the wall, the labeled bins under my bathroom sink, the tiny basil plants still alive on the windowsill. Not chaos, not collapse, a life. He handed me the tea and said very quietly, "I think I helped them make you look crazy." It was the closest thing to truth he had ever volunteered. I wrote down everything he said after asking if he was willing to repeat it to an officer if needed. He blanched at the word officer but nodded once. Then he asked if I was going to ruin Mom and Dad. That question told me exactly how he had been raised. I said no. "They did the ruining part themselves," he cried then. Not dramatically, just angrily, with his hand pressed over his eyes like he was embarrassed by his own face. I did not comfort him. Some grief has to sit where it lands. Evelyn Mercer called me 2 days later. Caleb Morris, the leasing associate listed as witness, had been in Colorado on March 18th attending his sister's wedding. Corporate had his approved leave dates and a photo he had posted publicly that afternoon with a mountain range behind him and the caption "Family Weekend." His name should never have been on a document signed in Oklahoma that day. The signature beside his printed name did not match his HR file. Someone in the office had either forged the witness line or allowed a forged document through without proper verification. Evelyn did not speculate. She simply said, "This is no longer a tenant dispute. This is a compliance issue and a potential criminal matter." I sat at my kitchen table with my pen still in my hand long after she hung up. If you were listening to this story at that point, what would you have done? Would you have met your parents privately and offered them one last chance to tell the truth? Or would you already know that people willing to do this will only use private spaces to lie better? I knew by then that any final conversation had to happen on a record I did not control, in a room I did not choose, with witnesses they had not curated. So when my Aunt Cheryl called to say the family needed to gather and clear this up before Easter, I agreed immediately. That sentence sounds simple. It was not. It meant walking voluntarily into a room where I already knew my character had been pre-written. It meant trusting that facts, if properly assembled, could survive family choreography. It meant resisting the very feminine impulse to soften everything so nobody felt publicly uncomfortable. There is a point in some betrayals where your dignity depends on your willingness to let other people be ashamed in full daylight. The family meeting was set for Tuesday, April 5th at my Aunt Cheryl's house in Sapulpa at 10 in the morning. Supposedly it was to bring peace before the holiday. In reality, it was an intervention with better curtains. Cheryl had invited my parents, Connor, me, my grandmother's sister Louise, and Mrs. Loretta because, as she put it, Mrs. Loretta had heard church talk and should know the truth. What nobody in my family knew was that Evelyn Mercer had asked if there would be a gathering where all relevant parties might be present. She said she needed to deliver the results of corporate review and discuss next steps concerning the fraudulent document and office acceptance failures. Aunt Cheryl, hearing only corporate and review, told her yes. That is how careless people invite their own exposure. They assume professionalism will protect them from humiliation because professional people are so often asked to clean up private messes discreetly. What they forget is that sometimes professionalism requires saying exactly what happened in the room where the lies were told. I arrived at Aunt Cheryl's house at 9:53. Her living room smelled faintly like lemon polish and the pot roast she had already put in the oven for dinner. The curtains were open, and the April light was too honest. My mother sat upright on the sofa in a cream blouse and navy slacks, dressed like a woman expecting to be vindicated by tone. My father stood near the fireplace with one hand in his pocket, trying to look inconvenienced rather than threatened. Connor was at the dining table, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Mrs. Loretta sat in the armchair nearest the window, lavender again, handbag in her lap, as if she had come prepared for weather. I had brought a slim binder with labeled tabs, but I kept it closed on my lap. Rule number 1 by then was this: never volunteer more than necessary before the other side finishes talking. My mother began within 3 minutes. She said everyone was tired of misunderstandings becoming accusations. She said I had always had a tendency to catastrophize. She said they had only spoken to the apartment office because I was overwhelmed and had asked for help in tears. That was new. She was now inventing a private emotional collapse to explain a public forgery. My father added that young people sign things all the time and forget, then blame others. It was almost impressive, the scale of their calm. Aunt Cheryl nodded as if reasonableness were being distributed fairly around the room. She turned to me and said, "Lauren, if they made a mistake trying to help, maybe this doesn't need to go any further." That is one of the most dangerous sentences women hear. Not because it sounds cruel, because it sounds moderate. People ask the person with evidence to be the bigger person because evidence has weight, and weight makes them nervous. It asks something of them before I could answer. Mrs. Loretta set her purse on the floor with deliberate care and said, "A mistake is using salt instead of sugar." This sounds more typed than that. I loved her for that line more than I can explain. My mother flushed, not with shame, but with irritation at being interrupted by someone old enough to remember her before she became convincing. Then the doorbell rang. Aunt Cheryl stood, smoothing her blouse, and went to answer it. Evelyn Mercer walked in carrying a black leather portfolio and a white file box with the apartment complex logo on the side. She wore a navy blazer, low heels, and the expression of a woman who had already decided what mattered and had no interest in family performance. Behind her was Sandra Pike from Ashford Oaks, looking tense and overcaffeinated. Aunt Cheryl blinked twice and said, "Oh? I thought perhaps this would be a phone thing," Evelyn replied. Given the nature of the review, in person seemed more appropriate. Nobody invited them to sit at first. That tiny breach of hospitality would have mattered to my mother on any other day. Instead, she remained very still on the sofa, with her hands folded so tightly in her lap the knuckles looked polished. Evelyn set the file box on the dining table, opened her portfolio, and asked whether Lauren Carter was present. I said yes. She asked whether Diane Carter and Randall Carter were present. My father said we are. It sounded smaller than his usual voice. Then Evelyn did exactly what my family had not prepared for. She did not ask anyone how they felt. She did not invite reconciliation. She did not flatter age or parenthood or church standing. She simply laid out the administrative facts one at a time in a room full of casseroles and old grievances. The lease termination form submitted on March 18th had been accepted without proper identity verification. The listed witness employee, Caleb Morris, was not installed on the date indicated and did not sign the document. The signature on the form materially differed from the tenant's known signature samples. Office intake timing and camera review did not support the account logged by staff. She paused only to turn pages. My mother tried first. She said there must have been some confusion and that Lauren had been in distress. Evelyn looked down at the file and said, "Mrs. Carter, this document should never have been accepted, and the submission itself is being referred as fraudulent." Those were the 7 words I told you changed everything, plus the rest of the sentence that turned my mother's version of events into a matter for official review. Not a family dispute, not a personality issue. Fraudulent. Then Sandra Pike, who I do not think had meant to become part of anyone's justice, added the detail that broke the room open. She said the person visible on camera entering the office at 11:47 a.m. on March 18th was an adult woman matching Diane Carter's driver's license photo, accompanied briefly to the door by a younger male who remained outside. Sandra had only verified this after law enforcement requested image preservation and corporate cross-checked visitor timestamps. She was not performing revelation. She was answering a question she had been asked that made it land harder. No one could accuse her of grandstanding because she was plainly wishing to be anywhere else. Connor made a sound then. Not a word. Just a sharp inhale through his nose, like a person hearing his own role read back to him in a language too plain to escape. My mother turned toward him so quickly it was almost a flinch. That was the first crack. My father tried to recover by saying there were probably many women who looked like Diane. Evelyn, still perfectly calm, said, "Mr. Carter, the plate number associated with the vehicle visible in frame is registered to your household." Then she removed a still image from the portfolio and placed it on the dining table face up. I did not touch it. That was important to me. I did not need to hold the proof. I had already lived it. There are moments when a room rearranges itself morally, not physically. The furniture stays where it is. The air is the same. But all at once, everyone knows who is carrying truth and who has been using confidence as a costume. I watched Aunt Cheryl's expression change first. Her mouth parted slightly and she sat down without meaning to. Mrs. Loretta looked at the still image and then at my mother with a sadness so tired it almost looked like boredom. She said softly, "Well, there you are." My mother opened her mouth once and closed it. My father began, "Diane only," and stopped there. That was all, a broken sentence. No speech, no noble explanation, just the outline of blame trying to move sideways and failing in open light. Connor put both hands over his face. It was the most honest thing he had done all month. Evelyn was not finished. She explained that because of the disputed submission, my lease would remain active without penalty. The termination would be voided in writing, and my tenant file would be corrected to remove any notation suggesting abandonment or early move out. A formal letter would be issued to me that same day. The office employee who accepted the document was under internal review. The witness signature issue had been referred separately, and because law enforcement had already requested documentation, her role was now limited to records compliance. Then she turned to me and asked, Ims Carter, would you like copies today or electronic delivery only? Imagine being restored by a woman asking an administrative question in a perfectly neutral tone. That is sometimes what justice sounds like. I said both. Please. My voice did not shake. I had spent 2 weeks earning that steady voice. After that, the room belonged to consequences. Not dramatic ones, real ones. Aunt Cheryl asked my mother very quietly if she had actually gone to the office pretending to be me. My mother did not answer. Sandra closed her folder. Evelyn handed me a business card and said if any outside party needed verification of the correction, I should have them contact her directly. Denise from Willow and Pine called while we were still sitting there. I let it go to voicemail because I would not split my attention during my own restoration. Her voicemail said, "Hi Lauren, just got the email from Ashford Oaks Corporate. Your file is clean. See you Thursday for your first full book." I listened to it in the hallway with one hand over my mouth. That is how long it took the truth to come back, 15 days. After Evelyn and Sandra left, nobody in that room knew what shape to make with themselves. The pot roast smell had gotten stronger, which felt almost obscene, food continuing as if bodies had not just been judged by paper. Aunt Cheryl gathered coffee cups that did not need gathering. My father stared at the still image on the table as if proximity might blur it. My mother sat on the sofa with her spine too straight and her face blank in that hard, overmanaged way. People look when their private self-image has been challenged in public. I had spent my whole life imagining that if the truth ever landed clearly enough, she would cry. She did not. Mrs. Loretta was the first person to move with purpose. She picked up her handbag, stood slowly, and came to me. She placed one cool hand over mine and said, "You did not owe them confusion. You owed yourself a record." It was such an exact sentence that I wrote it down later that night. Then she turned to my mother and with the same voice she might have used to discuss weather stripping or pound cake said, "Diane, there are some sins that begin long before the paperwork." My mother looked at her and said nothing. Not because she agreed, because there was finally nothing useful to say. Connor followed me onto the front porch a few minutes later. The day was bright and windy, and somebody down the street was mowing. It is strange what ordinary suburban sounds can survive. He stood beside the azalea bush and said he was sorry. Twice, but the second time quieter because the first one had not fixed anything. He told me Mom had said they only needed to scare me out of the apartment and that no one would ever check if the form looked normal enough. He admitted he had driven her because Dad was at work and because he thought if she handled it, everyone would calm down and I would move home for a while. Then he said I didn't think they'd call your job. That was the moment I saw the full smallness of his complicity. He had not objected because he assumed the blast radius would stay on me. I told him I believed he had not thought that far. Then I said that was the problem with being raised to center our mother. You stop asking what a plan will cost the person not in the car. He cried again and nodded. It did not redeem him. But it did make him human, which is sometimes more difficult to bear than a cleaner villain. Monsters are easy to cut off. Ordinary men who choose comfort over conscience leave a more complicated bruise. By Thursday, I was at Willow and Pine for my first full day. Denise had printed the corporate correction letter and kept it in my employee file. She did that without fanfare. Around noon, she slid a ceramic mug of coffee onto my station counter and said, "In case anyone ever gets imaginative again," that was her style. "No speeches, just systems. I love women like that more as I get older. The ones who do not call themselves saviors but quietly close loopholes around you." Word spread through church without my help. That detail matters. I did not send screenshots. I did not stand in the lobby correcting the record. I did not perform vindication for the benefit of spectators who had enjoyed the first version too casually. People began hearing piece by piece that corporate had come to Aunt Cheryl's house, that the document had been fraudulent, that the apartment file had been corrected, that there was camera footage, that someone from church had been involved in office access. By the second Sunday, the air around my parents had changed. Nobody confronted them publicly. Respectable communities prefer subtler punishments. Conversations shortened when they approached. Invitations thinned. My mother's Bible study attendance dropped from 12 women to 6 within 3 weeks. I did not arrange any of it. That is the quiet revenge no one warns people about. Once truth enters a community in administrative language, gossip no longer belongs to the liar. It becomes a weather pattern moving on its own. The legal side unfolded more slowly. The police report remained open for months. Ashford Oaks terminated the employee who had processed the form without proper verification and sent me a letter stating explicitly that I had not abandoned my unit and that any notation to the contrary had been removed. My attorney? Yes. I eventually retained one, sent cease and desist letters to my parents regarding contact with my employer and housing providers. The attorney's name was Sheila Price, and she was the kind of woman who used calm punctuation like a weapon. Her office smelled like toner and peppermint tea. She read my file once, looked up, and said, "We are going to make your records louder than their opinions." I nearly cried in her chair. My parents reacted by attempting one last soft campaign. Family friends called and said my mother was humiliated. My grandmother's sister Louise left me a voicemail saying legal action felt extreme. Aunt Cheryl sent a text asking whether I could at least reassure everyone no one was trying to send Diane to jail. I answered politely and identically each time. I said I am correcting false records and protecting my employment. I won't discuss it further. That sentence became a door. People knocked less after that. My father sent one email in late April. It had the subject line, "Please be sensible." The body was only 3 lines. He wrote that families should handle things privately and that I had made it impossible for my mother to show her face. I replied once, copying Sheila Price. I said, "You made a legal submission in my name and contacted my employer with false statements. Future communication goes through counsel." He never emailed again. My mother did not apologize. That absence deserves its own chair at the table. People imagine the satisfying ending is the parent breaking down, admitting envy or fear or control, begging for forgiveness, finally seeing the daughter clearly. Sometimes the truest ending is smaller and colder. Sometimes they maintain an internal innocence so stubborn that apology would require a demolition they are not willing to survive. Forgiveness has not fully arrived for me because remorse never really did. What I have instead is distance, records, and a life that no longer needs their version of me to soften. The most unexpected aftermath involved Mrs. Loretta. A week after the reveal, she invited me to her house for pound cake and coffee. Her living room smelled like rose lotion and old books. She brought out a shallow tin box where she kept church bulletins, sympathy cards, and little notes written to herself, after conversations she did not trust. She had written down the date and substance of what my mother said in the fellowship hall that Sunday. Not because she knew it would become evidence, she told me, but because women of her generation had learned to keep notes when something felt slippery. Then she looked at me over her glasses and said, "We weren't allowed much power, so some of us became records." I have carried that sentence like a tool ever since. It has been almost 2 years now, and my life is small in the ways that make me feel rich. I moved out of Ashford Oaks by choice 6 months after all of this, not because anyone forced me out, but because I found a better apartment closer to Willow and Pine with north-facing windows and a kitchen big enough for 2 people to cook in without apologizing. I signed that lease with Sheila Price reviewing it first, and Denise laughed when I told her. My client list is full enough now that I book blonding appointments 3 weeks out, and the $1,200 chair deposit that once felt terrifying has paid for itself many times over. Sometimes I stand behind my station with foils in my hand and think about how hard they tried to make me seem unfit for ordinary adulthood. Then I look at my calendar. Connor lives in Oklahoma City now. We speak occasionally, carefully, in the way people speak after a bridge has been rebuilt for foot traffic only. Last fall, he mailed me a birthday card with a gift certificate to a kitchen store and a note that said, "I should have told the truth sooner." It was not enough. It was also not nothing. Human reckoning often comes in amounts too small to feel cinematic. I have learned to recognize it without mistaking it for repair. My parents and I are not reconciled. I attend a different church now, a smaller one near Midtown where nobody knows my childhood role in advance. I have seen my mother twice in public, once at a grocery store and once at a funeral visitation. Both times she gave me the thin smile of a woman trying to preserve a story no longer shared by everyone in the room. My father nodded once and looked away. They are still married. They still host some holidays. They are simply not the center of my life, which I suspect is the one consequence they never imagined. The chosen family ending people crave is not dramatic either. It is ordinary, which is why it matters. On Thursday nights after the salon closes, Megan comes over with groceries and we cook something simple, usually pasta or sheet pan chicken, while my boyfriend Eli, who entered this story later and wisely, sets the table without commentary. Denise sometimes texts photos of terrible bangs from the early 2000s and asks if we survived that decade aesthetically. Mrs. Loretta still calls on Sundays if I miss service and says things like, I made too much chicken salad again, which is older woman code for come by if you need company. Last month, we all sat on my floor because I still have not bought enough chairs, eating lemon cookies off paper napkins while rain tapped the windows. No one asked me to explain my own life. No one needed me to become smaller for the room to stay calm. That is the thing I won. More than the corrected file, more than the cleared lease record, more than the first full book at the salon, I won the right to be ordinary without permission. I no longer confuse love with access or family with authority or concern with control dressed in softer words. There are still days when I think about that forged signature and feel a hot private grief rise in me because your parents are the first people who teach you whether the world will hold when you stand on it. Mine tried to teach me that ground could be moved under my feet if I displeased them. They were wrong. If you are in a moment like this now, where someone older, louder, or more believed is trying to define reality before you can get your shoes on, start a record, save the texts, print the email, write the date, tell one steady person, then tell a professional person. Let institutions do what they are supposed to do when private intimidation fails. You do not need to scream to win. You do not need a perfect speech. You need paper, time, and the willingness to let the truth be boring and devastating at once. I still do not have full forgiveness. Maybe I never will, but I have peace in pieces, and pieces are enough to build a life with. Tonight, after I finish recording this, Megan is coming over with takeout Thai food, and Mrs. Loretta says she has a tin of cookies in her car she wants me to accidentally keep. My station at the salon is stocked for tomorrow. The basil on my windowsill is somehow still alive, and when I lock my apartment door now, the sound is small, solid, and entirely my own.